War has always led to prisoners. In ancient times, many were turned into slaves by the victorious armies, while in medieval Europe, they were often returned to their families in return for a ransom, leading to fortune, or poverty, depending upon which side one was on. By the Napoleonic era, as armies grew in size and professionalism, many were kept in camps for the duration of the fighting, their captors not wanting to restore their enemy's manpower while the fate of nations hung in the balance. In the first half of the 20th century, war was fought on a global and industrial scale. Millions of men were flung into the grinder of World War I and World War II, leading to commensurately huge numbers of prisoners of war, or POWs. Camps were built to hold thousands of captives, with their own barracks blocks, parade grounds, and even farms. All of this meant that prisoners of war were taken across the world, and prisoners of war were typically comprised of two classes: officers and other ranks. Officers were often treated well, as there was still a sort of aristocratic courtesy among officers, particularly among the Germans, British, French, and somewhat less for the Russians and Italians. Concepts such as honor still held considerable currency, and bravery was greatly admired. Enemy officers, as a class, often had more in common with each other than with the millions of draftees in their armies, so enlisted men, as POWs, generally were not as well treated. Regardless of rank, though, throughout the war, many of these men did not sit idle. Many spent their time preparing elaborate escape plans in the hopes of returning to their home nations and back to the fight. The wildly popular film, The Great Escape, from 1963, has been a main factor in how the public views prisoners of war. And while that film was based on a book that details a mass escape of British and Allied prisoners from a World War II German prison camp for aviators, Stalag Luft III, a real escape from a German prisoner camp in World War I inspired the 1944 Great Escape from Stalag Luft III. The greatest number of successful escapes was made by Allied troops in Europe, including soldiers left behind after the fall of France and airmen shot down in bombing raids, but escapes happened across the world, from Canadian trains to German castles, and from the mountains of Italy to the wilds of Australia. Axis as well as Allied troops made their bids for freedom, keeping both sides on their toes. Everyone was looking to make the next great escape. The Second World War was full of escape stories, some bold, some tragic, and most filled with courage and ingenuity. There were moments of foolishness, like the story of an Italian on the run in Australia, who was caught ordering red wine with a heavy accent. But there was also incredible feats on all sides. People sought to return to the war or to help others to do so. Their stories were not only part of the overall struggle, but added a very human dimension to a war with a scope so large that it still defies imagination. Though it's often overlooked today, during World War II, the United States held hundreds of thousands of enemy prisoners of war, and the country was unprepared for the influx, despite the fact that only weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the government started detaining Japanese Americans and foreigners from Axis countries. Some camps, used for training Army recruits, were repurposed as prison camps, and the experience of building camps for the 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans was useful in building camps for the POWs. In addition to the Japanese, about 31,000 German, Japanese, and Italian residents were placed in camps. At first, there were few POWs because it took months for the American military to get ready to participate in campaigns. The first POW was a Japanese sailor who'd survived the sinking of his midget submarine in Pearl Harbor. The first German prisoners were survivors of U-boats sunk off the American coasts. There were also a few hundred German and Italian merchant sailors on ships seized in American ports. These sailors were interned as enemy aliens, not POWs. Soon, the prisoners came in waves. A sizable number came to the U.S. at the request of Britain, which had too many prisoners and sent tens of thousands to Canada and the U.S.